All right. We are live. It's Illegitimate Scholar here with Mr. Sue, who does, what's your Substack called again? Q-Poll, Quiet Part Out Loud,
Q-Poll.
right?
Yeah. QPOL stands for Quiet Parts Out Loud, where I cover macro geopolitics because, as I've learned, especially the last couple of years, you can't really separate the two. But as the great P. Quinones and others on the dissident right say, economics is fake and gay, and really everything is kind of driven by politics. Markets are driven by people that are pulling the levers of where the money's going, and whatever policy they pass, people are going to react to that and freak. So, yeah, economics is just an extension of the power that people wield in politics.
Economics is an extension of the power people wield in politics. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Love that. So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about economics. And oh crap, Phil's Substack is below, as is his Twitter. Jerome Powell, and you like Jerome Powell?
Powell is my pal in my Twitter name. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I totally typed that wrong as my.
I can't take credit for that though. I heard that from the great Danielle DiMartino Booth. She's a great follow. She worked at the Dallas Federal Reserve, which is also known as the free market Fed, for 9 years, and she came off of Wall Street out of retirement to go work there. And she has a newsletter Substack, of course, for her clients called Quill, and she wrote a book called Fed Up as well, just critiquing the certain political actors within the Federal Reserve and how things like ZIRP, or zero interest rate policy, and NIRP for Europe negative was really just kind of where it all went to crap. Because if you have quantitative easing to the point where you can only buy, as the Fed, you can only buy assets and bail people out at 0%, then you essentially just have fiscal policy and you don't need a Fed at that point. And honestly, I like to call myself not a Rothbardian, but now a Luongian. My friend and mentor, Tom Luongo, really turned my brain inside out. I learned a lot from him, and from him, people like Martin Armstrong and Danielle, as I mentioned, and just a slew of other people. I still kind of stick to my off-stream bona fides as a lens, but it goes way beyond that. And it's not just like money printing go burr, inflation is going to kill us all. There's a lot more nuance of certain tools and monetary policy and who's running them. And Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen after him were, I believe, just placed as globalists to strip mine the American economy and sell it out, because they're probably also in line with people at the World Economic Forum. They're essentially communists. And forever, the Federal Reserve acted as the central bank of the world to bail everybody out, and was in that line of thought to do QE everywhere. And Powell, I have a call, did a genealogy on him, and I don't think that he is a globalist. In fact, he is a Gentile at that, and he is essentially like 8th or 9th generation American. Like, his family are Virginians. These are the people that funded the American Revolution, and he came out of private equity. He's called Private Equity Powell for a reason, but what's ironic is that his private equity buddies are calling him up, and as Danielle says, he's not answering the phone, and they're calling him up like, hey, you can't keep raising rates, blah, blah, blah. And essentially what this raising rates is going to do, as it is doing, it's getting rid of all the crap, the filth, all of the over-leveraged zombie companies and banks, as we saw with SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, that went down earlier in the spring, and the others. Those are basically, as Tom says, Davos banks, or globalist World Economic Forum kind of institutions that took advantage of the zero interest rate policy. And that essentially has been the cancer in QE for the past 12 years. And Powell is basically saying no. In fact, when he got on the Federal Reserve Board in the first place, you can read this in the FOMC transcripts, he quite clearly spoke out against having quantitative easing. That, the lowest that we should go is like 2%, not 0. Because again, you don't need a Federal Reserve at that point to regulate monetary policy. And we saw the nth degree of how corrupt and bad that was during QE. I mean, it kind of was QE, but during COVID, when the CARES Act, Congress, uniparty-backed Congress passed the CARES Act, which forced because it was voted on in Congress, and forced the Fed to monetize all that debt. And Jerome Powell was simply reacting to that by raising rates and also draining trillions of dollars of really, base zero money into something called the reverse repo facility. So draining all these people, these globalists, of their dollars, and also raising the interest rate, make it more expensive for them to just print willy-nilly. Because there's something else out there called the Eurodollar system. Jeff Snyder's talked a lot about this, but he's kind of been proven to be wrong. We'll finish that maybe some other time. But there's something called the Eurodollar system, as I write in an article on QPol. It's article number 1, issue 1, called "It's Not About Inflation, Stupid." And raising rates isn't about taming inflation. It's really about destroying the offshore dollar market, or the Eurodollar system. And that essentially was created after World War II to basically rebuild Europe. And it's kind of gone off the deep end from there, because what you have, which also was the final straw that broke the camel's back in the great financial crisis, was that you had all these people, collateralizing things like David Bowie's song royalties, as Danielle talks about in her book, but a lot of other things that were just securitized, collateralized, and based off of nothing, essentially. And they were able to print dollars beyond the Federal Reserve's jurisdiction because they were offshore. And so basically Powell has all of this offshore money creation paired with the housing crisis, which was due to low interest rates and people spending money and creating all these bubbles, especially in the housing market. That really, the hens came home to roost when all that global capital offshore came in to infiltrate America's economy and just made the bubble that much worse. And so, again, there was all this money printing happening outside of America that Powell couldn't control. No one could control. I couldn't control. But you had a complicit Federal Reserve ran by globalists like Bernanke and Yellen that were going along with it. And Powell came in and he said no. And it's taken him a few steps and a few years to have the tools in place that will allow him to raise rates past 1% to where nothing would break. We can get into that later. But essentially, you're dealing with a different Fed. And I'll just kind of pause there. You can take it in whatever direction you want to go.
Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah, that's okay. All right, man. Hell yeah. Okay. So a few questions. From where I am, my knowledge of this is based on, on the Goodreads thing right here. It shows have you read this book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Ray Dalio?
I've heard of it, and I'm familiar with this, beautiful deleveraging thing. But yeah, what about it?
I mean, I just want to know what reference you have. And then here's the other thing. This is actually a larger thing, because this is kind of where most of my knowledge comes from, which is this woman, Nomi Prims. You must have heard of her, right?
I've heard the name. Really?
Okay, because I've read all 3 of these books. And that's I haven't read any of the other ones that you talked about, but I've read these ones. And it's a lot of similar stuff. All the President's Bakers, collusions, how the central banks, and ultimately for me it comes down to misplaced incentives.
Mm-hmm.
So break down a number. Let's break down a number of things that you were talking about. So you talked about 0% interest rate. What's the problem with 0% interest rate?
Money is essentially free, and you can give out more loans at no cost. And
who gets to decide who gets those loans?
I mean, the banks and all these other shadow banks, things like money markets and private equity firms, they react to whatever the monetary policy is. And so you could argue that Ben Bernanke set that for those kind of institutions, especially after Dodd-Frank. You basically had all of these bankers get punished after Dodd-Frank because all the
Dodd-Frank was the 30s.
No, Dodd-Frank was after the Great Financial Crisis.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know like all the details like of what happened, but essentially, I learned this from an interview that I don't know. Yeah, you're probably thinking that. But I learned this from a interview that Danielle DiMartino Booth did with Vivek Ramaswamy a few months ago. And essentially after Dodd-Frank, well, before you had, because of low interest rates, you had all this money flying around willy-nilly, but especially from the banks. And the bankers were basically running their banks as casinos and giving out loans to people that couldn't afford homes and, just pocketing cash from the loans. And once that blew up, they were heavily regulated. And so all those bankers, those, Wild West casino-like bankers, moved their activities into the private equity world. And now they're the ones that are basically getting punished with interest rates increasing because, again, money isn't free anymore. And so if anything breaks, it's going to be those types of actors. All the Silicon Valley type zombie companies that really benefited from San Francisco Fed policy. And remember, Janet Yellen was president of the San Francisco Fed. And so she basically was able to pass all these easy type of monetary policy things that benefited those. I will just blanket statement, call them like globalist financial institutions. So you have to, the difference in kind of like the books that you read and all this scandals and coordination of banks and central banks, that's the thing of the past now. Because the Fed.
Sorry, can you say that again? You're breaking up.
Yeah, my bad.
No.
Coordination of central bank policy and Federal Reserve banks, because there's 12 member banks of the Federal Reserve, is somewhat decentralized, ironically. Mm-hmm. It's not all a monolith because you have San Francisco Fed policy, which is, all these coastal Fed banks are more Keynesian, and the one we got Chicago and New York and Dallas, the New York Federal Reserve Bank is actually where monetary policy is signed, sealed, delivered, and set. They're at odds with each other. Some are more Keynesian than others, and some
what
are
does
more
Keynesian mean?
Like Keynesian economics, where the government should basically be in control of monetary policy, essentially.
Freaking Obama.
Yeah.
Yeah, literally Obama.
But basically, you have Lagarde being like this globalist actor and going up against Jerome Powell. And you have that especially now that she is Treasury Secretary and trying to do yield curve control. I don't know if I should even brought that up because I don't really know where your audience is at on this. But basically,
on what exactly?
Yield curve control.
Oh, I don't actually know what that is.
Okay. So let's just 86 that for this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I asked you what Keynesian economics is not because I don't know what Keynesian economics is. I mean, this is definitely not economic professionals here. Although we definitely have some, but we're gonna need to. I mean, you're saying stuff I don't know about, but there's a lot of stuff that I do know about that I think needs to be explained a little bit more. But that's okay. It's okay. You're probably blowing some people's minds right now. Especially because I definitely had a general negative view of Jerome Powell, I think, prior to this. And I don't really remember why. I used to watch a lot of, Maverick of Wall Street. You familiar with him?
I'm not.
Okay. He does a YouTube show. Okay, so 0% interest rates, that's at the American Feds. They're different federal banks. Under the central bank, right? Under the Federal Reserve.
So there are 12 districts. There are 12 Federal Reserve banks that make up the Federal Reserve System.
Right. And Jerome Powell is the chair of the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. And there are different presidents for each of the banks. Basically, you have people that want to have free money so they can have their bubbles and sell out the United States economy and do their central bank digital currency where everything is consolidated, kind of like how it was in the USSR, where there was one central bank dictating, but they want to have that dictate the world and get rid of commercial banking and the creation of private capital as we know it. Now, capitalism isn't perfect today, but it's definitely much more free than what these globalists at the left want. So I think the best thing to do is segue into debunking CBDCs. What are they? Who wants them and who doesn't? And so what I have seen over the past year is people freaking out about central bank digital currency. Now, there's a difference between a retail CBDC and a wholesale. So let's discuss retail, as most people like to understand what a CBDC is. So what a CBDC is essentially is that there's one bank and you basically have your own like digital wallet of that bank, and they can control. It's really more so of like controlling what you can and can't do with your money, like social credit system, all of that bad stuff. They can take money from you. They can give you limits. It's basically complete financial surveillance of the individual. But what that also means is that there isn't commercial banking. There is no JP Morgan. There's no Wells Fargo. There aren't any of these other competing banks, essentially. There's no credit unions, your favorite credit union down the street that you have a great reputation with, that you trust. There's no more regional banking. Like I'm in Texas, and Frost Bank is a huge bank, and it is a Texas bank. And so what's important about regional banking or banking as we know it is that it pulls in productive capital of that region. And that's essentially kind of what, who will pave the roads. It's kind of like a very localized economy thing. And it's like the people's money, essentially. And ultimately, if we zoom out and we just take JP Morgan, arguably the most powerful bank out there, because they were essentially the Federal Reserve before the Federal Reserve, because Pierpont Morgan himself, I think it was Pierpont, or maybe it was Junior, but JP Morgan, like in 1907, acted and operated as the Fed because he bailed out the stock market and the economy when the essentially, I think it was saving and loans industry blew up. I can't remember exactly what it was. But again, bubbles popping, nothing to really regulate and save everyone. So essentially, JP Morgan still kind of acts as a default Fed. But if you have a central bank digital currency at the retail level, you get rid of commercial banking. And the thing about that is, why would JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon himself, give up the power that he has? I mean, he's interested in, like it or not, he got in on the rebuilding of Ukraine deal, but that's just a huge like global capital project, and they're interested in things like drilling new pipelines, like international pipelines and all this stuff. And so if we had a central bank digital currency, you would really take out the middleman business of these major commercial banks. And people
who's going to control the central bank digital currency, right? Because the IMF. The IMF. Oh my God.
Yeah, IMF, World Bank, whatever. But that's essentially what Davos, World Economic Forum people, these like Euro commies, coming from old Rothschild money, essentially, or those people, Saturday people, as Pekinionis would call them. That's essentially what. That's the main battle. You have a battle between American-based sovereigntists fighting to preserve what is left of capitalism, fighting against these globalist communists.
So, the
purely out of incentive.
Is a bad thing,
none
right?
of it. It's purely out of incentive and survival.
Yeah.
You might not want to call them white hats. Tom calls it giants fighting giants, and you and I and everyone else watching right now are just ants trying to figure out how to survive. Yeah. It's not in the article that I sent you. It's the image is George Carlin's quote of saying it's all one big club and you ain't in it. that's not the case anymore, because if anyone's America first, it is Jerome Powell with his monetary policy that he is passing to basically punish all these bad actors that tried to strip mine the American economy by raising rates and basically having this America first monetary policy to preserve capitalism and commercial banking.
Okay, so
And one more thing to add, the shareholders of the Federal Reserve are the major commercial banks, being JP Morgan, the major Wall Street banks. And so if you have this World Economic Forum dystopia of a central bank digital currency, as I already said, you get rid of them. Why would they go lightly into that good night? Now, there are some more Davos-leaning, like Euro-commie banks of the commercial banks. Like I think Wells Fargo would be one. Barclays, Bank of New York, Mellon, perhaps. But again, like to my point earlier, it's not a monolith. Yeah. And you just have competing factions fighting each other. And it's not up to us, and we can kind of get into the Matt Gaetz victory thing. Yeah, but I'd love to. It's a very much us who care about what's happening, because if you don't care, you can just, buy your gold, Bitcoin, whatever, smell the roses, go about your day and not have an opinion. Or if you do care, and you want to be a part of the conversation, the best way to think of it is that we have to take a Machiavellian approach. And which elite, whether it's the American sovereigntists versus these globalist communists, which elite is going to give you the best deal of survival? And me personally, it's going to be Jerome Powell and the American commercial banks.
Okay. Yeah. All right. I'm speechless. I'm literally speechless. Gosh, that never happens. This is going to be funny for people listening. I'm usually the one. I usually can't shut up. 6. So
and to all my points. Eventually we want to get there, right?
Yeah.
But it's not going to happen overnight. And I'm even of the opinion that Jerome Powell doesn't think that we should have a Federal Reserve. Maybe I might be stretching it there, but let me just back up and let's go over a little bit of history of the Federal Reserve. So Martin Armstrong, great macro geopolitical analyst. There's a great documentary on him called it's called The Forecaster. It's free online. Just Google it. It's a good watch. He doesn't discuss this in the documentary, but he's known to say that the Federal Reserve was built to not have like one single monolithic Fed funds rate to control the price of money. In fact, because there are 12 regional Fed banks, those regional Fed banks should kind of represent the different economies within America, because the economy in Texas isn't the same economy as California or New York or Chicago or wherever. And so what they proposed in the original Fed charter was 12 regional rates, interest rates set by the 12 regional banks, dependent on how those economies acted. Because, every economy is unique. And so it gives you this idea that, yes, this Federal Reserve system, although today's standards, it kind of seems as, again, monolith is the word of the day here, as one monolithic economic system. But if you have 12 banks, it kind of sounds decentralized, right? And
decentralized to a certain extent.
Yeah. And so all that was done away, as Tom talks about a lot. That was done away thanks to, the fat commie FDR and passing all the New Deal stuff and really just socializing America as we understand it. And and I can see how Jerome Powell kind of wants to go back to that original Fed charter. of more of a decentralized idea. And I say that because had Trump not been elected and Powell not appointed, and John Williams not becoming the president of the New York Fed, again, the New York Fed is where monetary policy is set, we wouldn't have something called SOFR. SOFR is now what all of our debt is indexed to. And before I discuss SOFR, I want to just briefly cover what LIBOR is. So LIBOR is was kind of like the Fed funds rate, but and call me FDR, I like this guy. That's hilarious. LIBOR stood for the London interbank overnight rate or offering rate. I don't know. You look it up. But basically, LIBOR was kind of like the Fed funds rate, but at a global level. And it was established at the City of London. And people that are into like the Five Eyes or all these kind of centralized, maybe it's Masonic areas of power, consolidated power within the world. City of London is just rife with conspiracy theories and as far as like the British Empire, because I am of the opinion, as Richard Poe is and Tom Longo is and a few other people, that the City of London, the British Empire, never died, and they in a way controlled the American empire by controlling their interest rate, their monetary system through LIBOR. LIBOR was a way for them to manipulate what their interest rates would be. And all of our debt was indexed to that. So for example, if there was like a credit crunch, a credit crisis over in London or Europe, we would feel that. We would in a way socialize our losses, because your mortgage, your credit card, all of your personal debt instruments, that debt was indexed to LIBOR. And so if there was a credit crisis and LIBOR rates, interest rates went up overseas, we would also feel that, right? So in a way, we feel the same pain as people overseas, because LIBOR was an interest rate ball and chain that everybody had to deal with. And it was established by these central planners at the City of London. And there are, I believe, 18 or 17, let's go with 18 panel banks that decided what LIBOR was going to be. Like nowadays, I would get on a Zoom call and say, we're going to set it this low. Only one of those banks represented the interests of America, and that was the JP Morgan branch in London. And it really does just goes to show that there is like an America first, I guess, ethos within the monetary system. So now that we understand what LIBOR is, that brings us to Jerome Powell and John C. Williams. John C. Williams was the architect of SOFR. SOFR is based on a collateralized loan. Basically, our debt is now secured. It's based off of, like, do y'all understand the difference between unsecured and secured debt?
So is it a collateralized debt obligation?
That does something else. So basically,
okay. Sorry.
So unsecured debt is just like a credit card. Let's use a credit card for example, or like a loan shark. They give out money and then they charge you interest on that, and it's not backed by.
It's like a card note, right?
A collateralized loan is something that's based off of collateral, like a house or like your car or something like that. It's based off of something real, tangible or not, but it's actual market activity. And so LIBOR was unsecured. It was manipulated. It wasn't based off of anything, just, full faith and credit in a sense. And both of these rates are based on what financial institutions, banks would decide to settle up with each other. And with LIBOR, they of course charge each other less because, money for nothing kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then that brings us to SOFR, which is is based off of domestic economic activity in the United States, and is based off of collateral as well, and what they charge each other. Basically, what I'm trying to get at is SOFR, as Tom and others have come to, SOFR has been the real declaration of independence because we are no longer tied to LIBOR. In fact, LIBOR is phased out for everybody in the world, and everything is based off of SOFR. SOFR is based off of real economic activity, not just willy-nilly something that central planners decide. It's based off of what banks or whatever financial institutions within America want to charge each other, but it's actually based off of real economic activity. It's based off of something real, which basically means that it is in line with we no longer have to worry about socializing the financial losses. As I said, that's not exactly the case, but we're not tied to that ball and chain of LIBOR anymore, where something bad happens overseas and we have to also face that consequence. So
okay, but won't, regardless of this,
so like now all debt is indexed to SOFR. So whatever happens economically here, that rates go up. I mean, that's just kind of focused on like us. Whereas if something bad happened overseas, we would also have to feel that pain. But we are basically we are financially independent as far as what the price of our debt is.
Oh,
thanks to SOFR.
Okay. And what's SOFR again?
SOFR is basically the opposite of LIBOR. Just think of LIBOR as like this globalist central planning rate that's not based off of anything. SOFR is based off of actual, dare I say, free market activity between financial institutions and what they decide to charge each other. It's based off of it's collateralized in that sense is that it's based off of true activity. So yeah, there we go. LIBOR.
I should have pulled this up earlier, but I didn't realize we were going to stay on it for so long, and that it wasn't going to be easily explained to me, or I wasn't going to understand it fully. Secured overnight financing rate. And how does this secured overnight financing rate, does this have to do, wait.
It's just what
it sounds like a reverse repo to me.
No, that is the debt rate that that repo is indexed to.
Okay.
That's what they charge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. All right.
And just the biggest thing to take away from here is that this is all based off of American economic activity and not what a bunch of globalists at the City of London decide.
But doesn't the economy being intertwined sort of like the economies of all the different countries in the world being so intertwined, and the US having I know some people don't believe this matters, but these are two separate things, but it seems like there is a problem with having it seems like there's a problem with the US having, I completely forgot what I was going to say. You're blowing my mind right now. I'm getting.
Are you thinking about Contagion?
No. Well, I'm thinking about our economy. We buy so much goods from China. We sell so many things overseas. We have a international economy, whether it's literally one or not, right? So won't that's going to affect our economy a lot. But this one particular way of the different central banks, and then actually there's going to be three things, because what about
there's a war among central banks. We can get into that later. But
right, yeah. But the other thing is, the third thing, I want to bring up the second thing, but the third thing is, what about different central banks like Japan? I know Japan's always been a rogue one. And then, oh, wow. No, just those two things. I'm sure you can say plenty on those.
Yeah. So, I don't want to say too much without going beyond what people don't know, but basically there is, let's go back to World Economic Forum. In 2021, there was a conference called the Green Swan Conference, like not a black swan. Like this is all Christine Lagarde's like idea, where it was all focused on monetary policy should be based on climate change and all this. You can tell that Powell, like this is on a Zoom call. It was him and the guy from Bank of China and just a bunch of other people. He basically flat out said, no, I have my obligation is, my dual mandate of steady prices and full employment, and climate change is nothing that we're really concerned with. That's
I appreciate
basically what he said. He didn't say that verbatim, but and so essentially what this whole Euroeconomy Davos thing versus the Fed is all about is the European Central Bank doesn't have collateral, meaning they don't really have the resources, all the oil that we sit on. And I mean, that's kind of why they're having to kind of abandon their green efficient energy projects and buy overpriced oil from Russia and India and stuff. But essentially, their goal is to try to undermine the reputation of the U.S. economy and scare capital out of the U.S. into Europe, the Eurozone, because they know that they don't have the collateral. And they're really just kind of moving the deck chairs as far as the assets that they have on their balance sheet. And they can go bankrupt, essentially is what I'm getting at. And so the way that they're doing that is the way that they're ruining the United States credibility is through manipulating the quality of their debt. And this is where I'll get into like yield curve. So for the confidence that one has in a country's debt, that is most analyzed by the price quality of their 10-year bonds. Here we call them treasuries. But essentially, Lagarde is manipulating how German debt, the 10-year German debt, is priced and valued against America's. And she does so by doing basically her own form of QE and just like manipulating the bond spread is what it's called. And right now it looks like that European debt trades at a premium to the United States debt, which is completely false.
Okay. So she uses the European version of quantitative easing. This is the German finance minister, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or the president of the European Central Bank. ECB.
Right. Okay. So from the whole EU central bank.
Yeah.
Okay. And then their debt is trading at a premium. And what does that mean?
Basically manipulating the interest rate, like what the interest rate would be, because on the long end of like a yield curve or like long duration debt, let's just call it like the 10-year, that is basically trading at a better price than the US 10-year. And don't ask me exactly how like she is manipulating it, but basically it's going to be the markets calling her bluff and basically acting against her with their short positions and kind of take advantage of European debt like they did with their real country debt. These guys are called the bond vigilantes. And Powell's higher for longer policy basically bankrupts the people that need dollars or debt most, because he makes it more expensive. And with Europe being basically able to go bankrupt, they are essentially going to be running out of money, and these bond vigilantes, these bond traders, are able to come in and short the quality, basically bet that the price of German debt or European debt is much lower than it is, and profit that way. So
okay, right, okay, so
they're basically working in Powell's favor.
So the yields are too high. They've been manipulated, and the yields are too high on the European debt. So then people are going to people are shorting the bond market. So they're betting against the price of the bonds, as in they think the bonds are going to go down in price, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And just for like basics, the price of a bond, if it is higher, then the yield or the coupon should be lower, because the yield, the coupon, the interest rate is what it really is. A higher interest rate signals that it's more of a risky buy. However, the longer, like naturally, a longer duration bond, treasury, whatever you want to call it, the longer it is for that's issued for, because you have like short duration issuances. You have bills, which are less than a year. So like you buy a bond and you get the coupon paid out and principal back after a year. You have bills, which are less than a year. You have notes, which are 1 year to 10 years. And then you have bonds, which are beyond 10 years, like 10 to 30. And you should expect that the longer duration debt should pay you more of an interest. One, because inflation over time should go up, but it's also rewarding you for holding on to that bond for that long. So logically, you should be paid back for that more. And essentially, Janet Yellen and Christine Lagarde are coordinating this in such that Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, is buying
Secretary Treasury of the U.S.
Yeah. She is buying 10-year debt and selling the 2-year. She's selling a bunch of 2 years and issuing like short duration debt, which have a higher interest rate. And if she keeps buying 10-year, then you have the higher, the longer duration debts at a lower interest rate, and then you have the shorter duration debt at a higher interest rate. That is inverted. That should be the opposite, as I explained, because the longer duration that your debt is, the higher the interest rate you would expect, because you're again being rewarded for holding on to that debt for that much longer. And so she's hurt, and this is in a sense, this inversion of the yield curve scares capital away from entering the U.S. because it just looks like, hey, the U.S. markets aren't doing what they should be doing, so I'm not going to leave and go park my cash into safety in the U.S. So that could also scare capital out of the U.S. into Europe and provide Lagarde with more ammunition, in a sense, to keep manipulating the bond spreads to make German debt look more attractive than the U.S. debt. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's
Keynesian financial chicanery.
Yeah, and what's the Japanese central bank doing in all this?
They basically are kind of the Fed's wingman, because they have a new chair of their central bank. I think his name's Ueda. And
they're kind of Japanese, except for that one time.
Huh?
Sorry, keep going.
Okay. So basically, the Japanese central bank is kind of going along with what Powell's doing by normalizing their yield curve as well. Because remember, normalized yield curve should just be that the interest paid on debt should increase over time. And it's been the opposite like that in Japan, but they're slowly trying to raise their rate to normalize, because for a long time, you could do a very cheap carry trade, basically go to Japan, buy a bunch of yen. It's a yen in Japan, right? Buy a bunch of yen for basically nothing and go play with that, convert that into euros or dollars or whatever into some other market and just, profit and then pay back the low cost loan back in Japan in yen. And so it's kind of like they were able to provide all this like free money and profit off like those loans, in a sense, international loans. Japan was able to do that forever and provide this liquidity to this globalist coordinated central bank policy. But when you do that, you lose your not only monetary financial sovereignty, but also your sovereignty as a nation in itself. Because if you have all this George Soros capital coming in and using your money, your monetary system, you kind of, and this is also being applied in China as well, because all of the Evergrande FUD that's going around, a lot of the capital that went into Chinese real estate was Soros money, and when that collapses, that is basically sending Soros investment down to zero, and China saying, "F you, you're not going to control our markets anymore. We are establishing monetary independence from you." And in a sense, that's kind of what that's kind of what Japan is also doing by raising this. They're slowly raising their rates and having financial independence. And they're also, China and Russia and all these global South countries are all a part of the BRICS system. They are declaring not only financial independence, but just national independence from the West, because they are not going along with the World Economic Forum plan, right? I mean, they're in alliance with Russia, and this, zooming out, this goes back to the political battle of who's on the side of supporting this war in Ukraine, right? It's all European money globalist faction trying to take advantage of the global South. And this all stems back from British foreign policy. Going back, you can look this up and pull this up, but it goes back to the Mackinder Heartland theory.
The Mackinder what?
The Mackinder Heartland theory. This British scholar, I think from like the late 1800s, came up with it. Alfred Mackinder, but he basically said that he who rules the heartland, which is all Eurasia, Russia and just all of Europe and Asia, he who rules the heartland owns all the resources, and he owns all the resources, owns the world. So this is just an extension of British imperialism. And you wonder why these people hate Russia. Like this battle against Russia is centuries long. And so you just look at, if you look at it through that frame, it becomes pretty simple that that's why a BRICS nation is there's another try to find another site. There's like a wiki how or explain or something. Try that one. Yeah, here we go. It's like that first paragraph there.
Oh.
Actually, go. Yeah. That first passage. So if you want to read that out.
So Sir Halford John Mackinder, that's a Scottish name, was a British geographer who wrote a paper in 1904 called The Geographical Pivot of History. Mackinder's paper suggested that the control of Eastern Europe was vital to the control of the world. Mackinder postulated the following, which became known as the Heartland Theory. Who rules Eastern Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. The Heartland he also referred to as the pivot area and as the core of Eurasia, and he considered all of Europe and Asia as the world island. In the age of modern warfare, Mackinder's theory is widely considered outdated. At the time he proposed his theory, he took into consideration world history only in the context of conflict between land and sea powers. Nations with large navies were at an advantage over those that could not successfully navigate the oceans, Mackinder suggested. Of course, in the modern era, the use of aircraft has greatly changed the ability to control territory and provide defensive capabilities.
But this is British foreign policy 101. And if you put that in the context of the City of London and the creation of LIBOR and the control of American monetary policy via the Brits and MI6 intelligence, and considering that the OSS and now the CIA is all an extension of like these same British actors, these internationalists, America never really had independence up until they controlled their money through SOFR. But just think of it like these are still the people today. These are people that I'm talking about who are today the neoconservatives.
Oh, yeah. Okay. What? Wait.
So Zionists.
Okay. Yes. Let's yeah. We yeah, I get it. We're on YouTube, remember?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
And so if you just consider who hates Russia and why, and who has forced America to fight 2 world wars for them, and do so by just monetizing so much debt and putting us in the financial situation that we're at now, who does that really benefit? It's not the American people. It's not the sovereigntists. It's not the nationalists. It's not the populists.
Yeah, I mean, I think it benefits a extreme subsection of any population. So like it's a very, very small number of people that own like, a few dozen almost, or maybe a few hundred, but there's more than that from there. But
yeah,
0.01% of the population. So even the group you're referring to here, it's an extreme subsection of that group.
It is, but it's important to realize that it was Europe, it was Lagarde, it was all of them whining, begging on their knees to Powell. I think there was even an article in Reuters that the UN was just very outward, like Powell needs to lower rates. Like, it's not a monolith. You have these factions fighting against each other, and the reason Powell is my pal is he's saying you to the globalists.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I love that because it's just I don't like imperialism of any form, really.
Right.
Because to me, when I think about imperialism, I think about one group holding sway and power over multiple diverse ethnicities or whatever else, ethnicities, religions. People divide themselves based on different factors over history, but with empire, it's always someone imposing their own values and their own will on another group of people, and that's never good. It should be as local as possible.
Yeah.
The British in Ireland, the Persians everywhere. The Persians are generally considered more of a benevolent empire, and in a lot of cases, the British are as well, compared to the Dutch or the Belgians. But that doesn't mean they're still not imposing, foreign values on other people. But yeah, man. Okay, so this question from Craig: will BRICS replace the dollar as world reserve currency eventually? Well, BRICS doesn't have a currency themselves yet.
So, both Tom Longo and Vince Belanchi. Vince is like a real big like gold guy analyst. Essentially what BRICS is going to do is they're going to create their own trade network that is completely separate from the dollar, because rightfully so, the dollar has been utilized as a weapon against everybody, but in this case particularly the global south. But again, it kind of goes back to like both Powell and Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan have gone overseas to visit with both Japan and China. And I believe that they are working together in a sense to both be involved in what this new financial world looks like. And so, yes, China and all these other countries are going to slowly be selling their U.S. treasuries, but they don't want to see the United States implode because nobody benefits from that. It's just bad for business. And I don't see BRICS really replacing the dollar per se, but Jerome Powell a year or two ago even said that there's more than enough room for just one reserve currency as well. And what they'll basically do is set up different financial shops within JP Morgan, like Vince Blanchie best kind of explains this, that for example, let's say that JP Morgan wants to set up a shop in China for like a gold operation, because it's more cost effective than just having to have an operation here and like sell and transport all that gold across seas. So why not make nice and have HQ in China? So I really more see this as like a global cooperation with the American sovereigntists and the global South nations within BRICS. So I don't, wow. And if anything, BRICS and eventually the Fed or the American sovereigntists, BRICS, I can see though it's not perfect, they're going to have like this tokenized like gold kind of currency to where they use to settle up with each other as a more trusted system. And again, like it's going to be a centralized monetary, system that they have, but it's still better that they trust themselves and their own trade federation amongst BRICS than the people that screwed them over being the West. And when I say West, I mean like the Euro commies, the neocons, and the traders within Washington who are also neocons selling out American politics and the economy. And we can actually segue into the victory that Matt Gaetz took this week.
Okay. Yeah. Last thing on that, because it is 8:57. We'll have to do it again. You'll have to come back because, I'm going to need a couple days for my brain to reboot. But yeah, Matt Gaetz, what's going on there?
So, I mean, he's basically outing the Uniparty, right? Republicrats or whatever you want to call them, but basically, people that don't have the American system, economy, people at their interest. They're more internationalists, or at the very best, they're just self-interested and they work for people overseas that are promising them sweet deals or whatever the case might be, right? And for Gaetz to get enough votes to get McCarthy, who was uniparty to the fullest, McCarthy out of there, it just really speaks to the fact that there are sovereigntist forces that have an America First policy within our government. And that, along with the monetary policy conducted by Powell and, Gaetz probably maybe speaking for those, monetary financial interests, kind of being the mouthpiece of it, it really does paint a picture that there is a counterculture, like revolution happening within our government for the better. So nobody knows really how it's going to play out. This is very recent, but it is also very unprecedented in politics. But it's kind of, I don't want to call it like a great man moment or whatever, but it's something very close to that. And revolutions do happen. And again, I'm kind of being redundant. Nobody really knows what's going to come out of this, but things are changing for the better on the monetary scale, on the political scale. And so it's very easy for people on Twitter, online, wherever, to buy all the doom porn that, the dollar is going to die tomorrow, or it's all one big club and we're not in it, and all these people at the top are going to screw us. It's not like that at all. It's much more nuanced, and there are factions fighting amongst each other. And there is a particular faction that is basically trying to save humanity, and we should take that win.
Well, I hope you're right. I do hope you're right. I definitely, for a long time, thought that our economy is on the edge of collapse, especially with the world economy. And I guess I have one last question.
Well, it definitely isn't perfect, but just real quick back to Gates.
Yeah.
I mean, what's he pushing for? Fiscal policy, responsible spending, protecting our border, all that stuff. But essentially what that does and what Powell's tight monetary policy is doing is forcing Congress to cut back on spending. And one way that we can fix the deficit is by throwing gold out on the yield curve, as Vince Blanchi likes to talk about, which essentially means make our debt super attractive to global capital. How do we do that? Well, we back a percentage of interest coupons by gold bullion, or as RFK's kind of talked about, not just gold, but commodities, maybe even Bitcoin. And we basically just an announcement of that and an announcement of we're going to cut back on spending just sends United States economy credibility through the roof.
Yeah.
And capital will come back here. And it's a way for us to take care of unfunded liabilities. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, and these bond issuances will probably be for like 50-year durations, as crazy as it sounds. But this idea comes back to another Trump appointee, Judy Shelton. Like, this was her idea. Like, gold-backed bonds was her idea. And, of course, the stay behind Obama people in the government and just globalists shot her down, and she wasn't appointed on the Federal Reserve Board. But you have these ideas coming back into play, and what Matt Gaetz was able to do is just kind of like a mouthpiece for things like that to happen if we're able to get rid of the uniparty, get rid of the deep state. So whether or not that happens, I don't know, but I'm sure hopeful, and I'll sit back here with my popcorn and try to articulate the best way that I can for other people to understand.
Okay. All right. Sounds good, man. Absolutely. All right. Your links are in the comments below. Is there anything else you want to share before we get out here?
No, man. Like I said, my Substack, you can find me on at Mr. Sue or Phil Gibson. On Twitter, I'm still calling it Twitter. It's not X. That's stupid.
I will call it Twitter as well.
Anyway, I'm not like a hater of Elon, though. I think he's just a very spurgy, idealistic person, but he's got charisma and he's accomplished a lot. So that's awesome. But regardless, you can find me on Twitter at Mr. Sue, MRPSEU, and you can find my Substack at QPOL. QPOL stands for the quiet parts out loud. I try to write something once a week. My cat is going crazy. It's hilarious. And I'll occasionally have do podcasts, whether it's like me doing my reads or I'll have Tom or someone else on. And that's pretty much my story, and I'm sticking to it. And, Santa, it was awesome coming on. I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man. We're appreciate it. Finally. All right, man. I'll talk to you soon. See you on Twitter.
All right. Peace.
All right. Bye.